Forward we've lost already, so some of these assets that were there in the buildup are leaving. New troops are coming in. I don't think we've seen the end of the bombing campaign. Hopefully we've seen the end of what we call. It's much easier to Vietnam, Afghanistan.
And the Saudis have these kind of craft, corvettes, patrol boats, and then you're going to need land-based air to maintain air superiority. So this will be a huge and resource-intensive effort.
2 Iranian oil tankers left Chabahar port, each carrying crude oil worth millions of dollars. Destination: international markets. They had done this for 45 days without anyone stopping them. This time was different. Before those 2 tankers had traveled 20 miles, a U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyer appeared on their radar. No warning shots, no dramatic standoff, no confrontation at all. Just a radio call. 3 words. Turn around. Now. Both ships turned around. Oil tanker reversing course at sea, Gulf of Oman. That moment, 2 oil tankers quietly reversing course somewhere in the Gulf of Oman, was the exact moment Iran understood that what it had called a bluff was not a bluff at all. And what happened next shocked not just Iran, it shocked America's own allies. To understand the scale of what just happened, you need to go back 72 hours and hear exactly what Iran said. When Trump announced the blockade on Sunday, April 13th, Iran's response came fast, and it came loaded with confidence. Iran's former IRGC commander Mohsen Rezai, brought out of retirement to serve the new supreme leader, went on record with this. The United States, just as it suffered a historic defeat against Iran in attempting to open the Strait of Hormuz, is also doomed to fail in any naval blockade. Iran is not a place that can be contained with tweets and imaginary blockade plans. Iran's parliament speaker posted a photograph of gas prices at stations near the White House. His message: enjoy the current price of gasoline. Iran's Navy chief called the blockade ridiculous. Iran's armed forces called it piracy. 4 senior Iranian officials. 4 different words. One shared assumption that America would announce a blockade, generate headlines, and then quietly back down when confronted with mined waters, coastal missiles, fast attack boats, and the political cost of enforcing a siege in one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. That assumption collapsed in 36 hours. U.S. Central Command Commander Admiral Brad Cooper released an official statement. The language was precise and unambiguous. An estimated 90% of Iran's economy is fueled by international trade by sea. In less than 36 hours since the blockade was implemented, U.S. forces have completely halted economic trade going into and out of Iran by sea. Complete halt in 36 hours, not a slowdown, not a partial restriction, a complete halt of 90% of Iran's economy in a day and a half. Air is the detail that most coverage has completely missed, and it is the detail that explains everything about how this blockade works and why it is so devastatingly effective. Iran expected the United States Navy to do what most people imagine when they hear the word blockade: park warships inside the Strait of Hormuz itself, in shallow, mined missile-range waters, where Iran's IRGC fast attack boats, shore-based missiles, and underwater mines could threaten every American vessel. That is not where the U.S. Navy went. A U.S. official speaking to reporters this week described the strategy in 4 words: our net is the Gulf of Oman. The warships are not inside the strait. They are on the other side of it, in open deep water, waiting. Any Iranian ship leaving port must pass through the Strait of Hormuz to reach international markets. The strait is shallow and narrow, 21 miles at its tightest point. Once a fully loaded oil tanker clears the strait and enters the Gulf of Oman, it is in open water. The mines are behind it. The tight confines that favor Iran's fast attack boats are behind it. The Iranian coastline is behind it, and the U.S. Navy is right there in front of it. CNN's military analysts noted this week that the IRGC's small attack boats are designed specifically for the close confines of the Persian Gulf, not the open Arabian Sea. And critically, despite Iran firing over 100 missiles at U.S. carriers during this war, not a single one has successfully struck a U.S. warship operating in the Arabian Sea. The Institute for the Study of War made the scope of this blockade clear in a published assessment. They wrote that the U.S. blockade has no defined geographic boundary, and that the United States can interdict vessels almost anywhere in international waters until they arrive at their final destination port. A former U.S. Navy captain summarized it simply: the U.S. doesn't have to put ships in the Persian Gulf to blockade Iran. And the force being used to enforce this is staggering. According to CENTCOM, the blockade involves more than 10,000 U.S. sailors, Marines, and Air Force personnel, more than 100 fighter and surveillance aircraft, and over a dozen warships positioned in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Iran built its entire counter-strategy around the assumption that the U.S. would have to fight through the strait to enforce anything. The U.S. put a net on the other side. Iran's tankers walked out. The net was already waiting. Numbers tell the story that words cannot. According to Miad Maleki, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, more than 90% of Iran's $109.7 billion in annual seaborne trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has no meaningful alternative trade routes, none. And the blockade is estimated to cost Iran approximately $435 million per day in combined economic damage. Break that down further. $435 million per day is $18 million per hour. Every single hour the blockade holds, Iran loses $18 million, not oil revenue alone, total economic activity, imports, exports, everything, frozen. NBC News reported the first 48 hours in detail. 9 ships were turned around by U.S. forces. At least 5 were carrying oil. 2 of those oil tankers were intercepted and ordered back within the first 2 hours of the blockade going live, while Iran was still publicly calling it ridiculous. And here is the detail that reveals just how complete this operation is. No shots were fired. U.S. personnel did not board a single vessel. The ships received radio instructions and reversed course on their own, voluntarily, without a confrontation. That is perhaps the most significant operational fact of all. The most powerful naval blockade since the Cuban Missile Crisis, enforced entirely by radio communication. No escalation for Iran to exploit, no incident to claim as American aggression, just a voice on a radio, and ships turning around. The title of this video promised you something that shocked even America's own allies. Here is exactly what that was, and why it matters more than most coverage has acknowledged. When Trump announced the blockade, the expected opposition came from expected places. Iran called it piracy. China called it dangerous. Russia condemned it. But then something nobody fully anticipated happened. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer went on BBC Radio on Monday morning, the day the blockade took effect, and said with unmistakable clarity, "We are not supporting the blockade." The United Kingdom is not getting dragged into the US-Israel war on Iran. The United Kingdom, America's closest military and intelligence ally, the country that stood with the U.S. in the Gulf War, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in virtually every major military operation for 70 years, publicly, refused to join. Then France's Emmanuel Macron said the blockade risked escalation and reiterated that military force to open Hormuz was unrealistic. Spain's defense minister called it something that, quote, makes no sense. Turkey criticized it. Qatar called for immediate resumption of maritime activity without conditions. China's foreign ministry called it, and these are their exact words, dangerous and irresponsible. The IMF simultaneously cut its global growth forecast to 3.1% for 2026, warning the world was drifting toward what it called an adverse scenario of sustained $100 oil.
IMF, global growth cut to 3.1%, warning adverse CO.
But here is the twist that makes this story genuinely extraordinary. The same allies who refused to support the U.S. blockade simultaneously gathered to form their own coalition against Iran's original Hormuz closure. Britain's Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper convened a virtual meeting of more than 40 countries: France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Japan, UAE, Bahrain, Panama, Nigeria, all present. Cooper opened the meeting with this: "We have seen Iran hijack an international shipping route to hold the global economy hostage, 40 countries, agreeing with America's goal, refusing America's method." Because here is what nobody wants to say out loud. But analysts at King's College London said it plainly this week: America is an oil exporter. The U.S. can blockade Iran and actually benefit from higher oil prices. Europe and Asia depend on Hormuz oil. They are already paying $100 a barrel because of this war. The U.S. blockade, however effective against Iran, makes their energy crisis worse before it makes it better. America's allies are not opposed to the goal. They are opposed to bearing the cost of the method while America collects the benefit. That divergence, exposed in public on the record this week, is what shocked them more than any military development in this entire war. While the blockade drains Iran's economy $18 million per hour, Iran is not simply waiting, it is doing something that satellite imagery this week confirmed, something that has received almost no coverage despite being directly relevant to what happens if the ceasefire collapses. CNN reviewed satellite images taken on April 10th, 3 days ago, of multiple Iranian missile bases. The images show a consistent pattern across multiple sites. Front-end loaders are scooping rubble from blocked tunnel entrances. Dump trucks are removing the debris. The entrances to Iran's underground missile cities, collapsed and blocked by U.S. and Israeli bombing runs during the war, are being systematically unblocked. A researcher at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies explained why this matters. This aligns with the overall concept of operations for the missile city, which was, you eat the first attack, dig yourself out, and then launch again. U.S. intelligence assessed that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers survived the first month of fighting. Many of those launchers are believed to be buried underground by strikes on the tunnel entrances, and according to the satellite imagery, Iran is now actively excavating them. Every day of the ceasefire that Iran uses to unblock a missile launcher is a day that changes the military calculus if bombing resumes. And on top of that, Iranian officials this week issued a new threat specifically directed at the blockade. If the U.S. naval siege continues, Iran warned it would begin disrupting shipping in the Red Sea, a separate choke point, as a counter-pressure measure, choke point. The blockade is working against Iran's economy. Iran is simultaneously working to restore the military capability it will need if the blockade triggers a resumption of war. Both things are happening at the same time, right now. The blockade is confirmed working, $435 million per day, complete halt, 9 ships turned back. Zero breached it in 48 hours. CENTCOM confirmed it. Multiple independent sources confirmed it. But working and working fast enough are two completely different things. The Council on Foreign Relations published an analysis this week that cuts to the core of the problem. Their assessment was direct. Economic pressure takes time to hit home. The ceasefire, however, ends in approximately 6 days. Sanctions and economic sieges typically take months, sometimes years, to force behavioral change at the government level. Trump has deployed the most effective short-timeline economic pressure operation in recent memory, but the ceasefire expires April 21st. The blockade has been running for 2 days. The math does not work unless something else moves first, and something may be moving. Trump told the New York Post this week, calling them back 30 minutes after an initial interview, with a specific update, "You should stay there, really, because something could be happening over the next 2 days, and we're more inclined to go there," referring to Islamabad for a second round of talks. Hours later, he told ABC News, "I think you're going to be watching an amazing 2 days ahead. I really do." A president who 48 hours earlier said he did not care whether Iran came back to the table. Now calling media outlets back to tell them to stay close because something is happening. The Associated Press confirmed, citing 4 separate sources, that a second round of talks is expected in Islamabad. Pakistan's army chief personally flew to Tehran carrying a message from Washington. Mediators from Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt are working through the night to bridge the gaps. The blockade is the pressure. Islamabad is the release valve. April 21st is the detonator. And somewhere between those 3 forces, in the next 6 days, this either becomes a deal or becomes a resumption of the most destructive air campaign in the Middle East since the Iraq War. Before we close, there is one more dimension to this story that deserves to be said plainly. What the United States Navy has done in the past 48 hours is genuinely unprecedented in modern warfare, not because of its military scale, though the scale is significant, because of its economic precision. For the first time in modern history, a major naval power has imposed an almost perfectly targeted economic blockade, not on a country's coastline, not on a single port, on the entire seaborne economic output of a nation of 88 million people, enforced without a single shot fired, without boarding a single vessel, without a single military confrontation. The ISW noted this week that the blockade has no defined geographic boundary. A former U.S. Navy captain told CNN that a tanker moving at less than 20 miles per hour, barely faster than a bicycle, can be tracked and intercepted anywhere in international waters. The U.S. Navy has the surveillance architecture, the aircraft coverage, and the surface fleet to enforce this blockade from the Gulf of Oman to the Indian Ocean to beyond. Iran built its deterrence around the assumption that America could not close Iran's economic arteries without entering a shooting war. America just demonstrated it can. That demonstration, more than any airstrike, more than any diplomatic threat, is what changed the calculation this week. For Iran, for America's allies, for China, for the global energy market, for everyone watching, here is the complete honest picture as it stands today, April 15, 2026. Iran called the blockade imaginary, ridiculous, piracy, doomed to fail. Then U.S. Central Command confirmed, in less than 36 hours, that U.S. forces had completely halted 90% of Iran's seaborne economy. 9 ships were turned back in 48 hours, 0 broke through. $435 million per day in economic damage, no shots fired, no escalation. A net in the Gulf of Oman, and ships quietly reversing course on radio instruction. America's closest allies, the UK, France, Germany, Canada, Japan, were shocked, not because the blockade failed, but because it worked. And because its success exposed a fracture in the Western alliance that goes far deeper than this conflict. America profits from $100 oil. Its allies are being crushed by it. The goal is shared, the cost is not. Iran, meanwhile, is not sitting still. Satellite imagery shows underground missile bases being systematically excavated. New threats against Red Sea shipping have been issued. The IRGC has placed its forces on maximum combat alert. The ceasefire is being used by both sides to prepare for what comes next. And at the center of all of it, a 6-day window. The ceasefire expires April 21st. A second round of talks in Islamabad appears imminent. Trump is telling reporters to stay close because something amazing is coming. The blockade is the most effective economic weapon deployed in this conflict. The question, the only question that matters right now, is not whether it works. It is whether it works in 6 days. This video is based entirely on verified public reports and official statements from U.S. Central Command, NBC News, CNN, Al Jazeera, The War Zone, Reuters, Navy Times, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Institute for the Study of War, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the International Monetary Fund, the Associated Press, ABC News, and multiple independent military analysts.